The petroleum industry has routinely attacked and targeted the limited tax credits for alternatives to petroleum fuels, saying the government should not pick winners and losers, but the facts are different. While the ethanol industry allowed the corn ethanol blenders tax credit to expire at the end of 2011, today the oil industry enjoys billions in permanent tax subsidies unique to the petroleum industry. The oldest of these oil-only subsidies dates back to 1913, meaning petroleum has received a century of subsidies, including things like percentage depletion allowance, expensing of intangible drilling costs, and several more. One petroleum company seeking investment for an oil drilling project noted on their website that, quote, "The immediate deduction of the intangible drilling costs is very significant, and by taking this upfront deduction, the risk capital is effectively subsidized by the government by reducing the participants' federal and possibly state income tax," unquote. Investopedia.com adds, quote, "No other investment category in America can compete with the smorgasbord of tax breaks that are available to the oil and gas industry," unquote. Buried deep in its website, the American Petroleum Institute even brags, "Taxpayers have the option to expense intangible drilling costs since the inception of the tax code," unquote. Given the century of subsidies for the petroleum industry, some of us wonder when big oil will be able to stand on its own 2 feet without a taxpayer crutch. These petroleum tax subsidies are in effect today and cost the taxpayers billions each year. In fact, with comprehensive tax reform under discussion in D.C., and despite their record profits, the major petroleum associations just wrote a letter to the U.S. Senate defending their special treatment. Mr. Jacobs, do you support a thorough review of the petroleum industry's century of subsidies to determine if they should be continued?
I absolutely support the idea that we should be reviewing all of the tax breaks that are provided to the oil industry. And I've spent my career as a businessman and have spent a good bit of my career in the energy industry, so I am very familiar with all of these tax breaks that are handed down to the oil companies. And I think the fact of the matter is that what that has created is an unlevel playing field. And that's fundamentally not right. And that's something that we absolutely need to address. And I think there's a broader point in there as well, that our current tax code is chock full of special interests for a lot of different industries. And I think that's one of the things that's getting in the way of economic growth and job creation in this country. And I think we need to simplify our tax code. It's way too complex. We need to reduce the burden on tax or on job creating businesses in this country. And we need to get rid of the disincentive that we have in this country to invest and save. Because the bottom line is that our tax code is preventing new businesses from starting. It's precluding businesses from continuing to grow and invest. And all of this comes at the expense of American people and the loss of good jobs. One of the things I did take note of all of the jobs that have moved overseas in this country. And our president likes to get on the bully pulpit and demonize companies for moving jobs overseas. And I think what we need to do is look in the mirror and say, why is this happening? And I think one of the reasons that this is happening is because we have a tax regime in this country that discourages new investment and growth, and that is wrong. What we need to be doing is we need to simplify our tax code, and we need to encourage new investment right here in America, and we need to bring jobs back to our shores.
The petroleum industry routinely warns small refiners of the potential liability threat from offering renewable fuels like E15 or B20, 20% biodiesel. Based on a review of the law and past history, IRFA believes these warnings are more about protecting petroleum's market share than any actual liability threat. Yet the scare tactic has gained ground, and many retailers will cite liability concerns as a reason for not offering higher blends of renewable fuels. Given that, IRFA supports federal legislation that would exempt retailers from liability if they are selling a legally approved fuel while complying with all state and federal regulations, fuel specifications, equipment requirements, pumping labels, etc. If the EPA approves a fuel, the retailer properly dispenses the fuel, and the consumer chooses the fuel, then the retailer should be protected from frivolous lawsuits. Such protection would further the goals of promoting energy independence through their increased use of renewable fuels and would help eliminate technical barriers and speed the entrance of new fuels to the market. Mr. Jacobs, do you support federal liability protection for self-service retailers?
I do, and I'll go one step further. I think one of the big challenges we have in this country is frivolous lawsuits. And they add to the cost of doing business, and ultimately, I pay more for products I buy. You all here pay more for products you buy because of frivolous lawsuits. And I think we need to undergo significant tort reform in this country to get rid of frivolous lawsuits. You know, there was an act that passed in the House of Representatives earlier this month, the Innovation Act. And this was a bipartisan piece of legislation that dealt with limiting the ability for patent trolls to sue on new technologies. And this was passed with a broad bipartisan support in the U.S. House of Representatives. You know who voted against that legislation? Congressman Braley. Congressman Braley did not vote for a piece of legislation to help reduce frivolous lawsuits. And a little bit closer examination will tell you why. As I said, he has long, consistently supported trial lawyers in frivolous lawsuits. And I look at this, and this is a clear act of something that where he chose to support his profession in trial lawyers versus supporting citizens in the state of Iowa.
The Iowa Renewable Fuels Association believes that the single most important energy title program for the renewable fuels industry is the Rural Energy for America program, otherwise known as REAP. This grant initiative for the installation of blender pumps, and it is for fueling stations around the country. The REAP program currently makes grants available to retailers who invest to bring consumer choice for motor fuels. Expanding the availability of blender pumps expands consumers' ability to choose the fuel of their choice, not one dictated by big oil. This increases competition in the marketplace. With the future of the RFS in doubt, given recent EPA proposals, the REAP blender pump program is more important than ever. Big oil continues to use its petroleum distribution monopoly to thwart retailers and consumers who wish to offer or buy higher ethanol or biodiesel blends. Blender pumps put the power back in the hands of consumers. Within a Farm Bill energy title, do you support continuing grants for blender pump installation? Mr. Jacobs.
I do, and I think that's the important thing, and it really picks up on the question Sam asked earlier on open fuel standards. There's really a couple things we need to do to continue to expand the growth of fuel options in this country. Number one is we need to make sure more and more cars that are produced have the capability of using alternative fuels. The other thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the supply is there, and that gets to the point on blender pumps. You know, these can be for established service stations, expensive pieces of equipment in terms of new investment, and I think this is another great example of where government policy, and while I don't, again, support subsidies in perpetuity, this is a great, another example of where a one-time opportunities, a program for a period of time to help retailers develop or install this new technology that allows blender pumps makes sense, because the bottom line is once a service station has done that, consumers have many more choices of what to put in their vehicle, anywhere from E85 to E50 to E30 to E15. I do drive a flex fuel vehicle, and I tell you, I look at the prices in terms of where it is. I know what the mileage differential is for each of the different fuel grades, and it's something I can choose every time I go to the pump, which is the best option for me as a consumer to put in my car. The fact of the matter is we just don't have enough service stations today that offer that choice. And as I said, travel all over this state here, Sometimes I'm lucky when I need to refuel, and there are those types of service stations, but many times I'm not, and I'm limited in terms of my choices. And again, I think that goes against our very principle in this country, free market enterprise and helping to develop choices. And again, sometimes the government has to play a little bit of a role to make sure that those competitive forces are there for the benefit of consumers.